everybody, Mike Iaconelli back out here in the shop, and we've got a good one for you today. And today we're talking about the lost Rapala DT. And what I mean by that is we're going to be talking about the Rapala DT Fat 1. And this is a special lure that does special things. Now, if you're watching this series, you know how much I love the Rapala DT series. From the big giant DT 16s, 14s, to the 10s and 8s, to the DT 6s, to the 4s. But for some reason, this DT Fat 1 is a sleeper. And I'm here to make you aware that this is one of the best kept secrets in the DT lineup. All right, first of all, let's take a look at this bait. And really, I want to show you why this thing does what it does. First of all, this is a balsa bait. And if you know and use some of the other DT baits, you know that one of the keys to it is that it's balsa. And balsa is such a unique material because of its buoyancy. Balsa is very buoyant. It's strong, it's light, but that buoyancy is going to help this bait do some special things. So look at the size of that bait, right? Look how fat and wide that bait is. Almost looks like an egg. And that whole egg is balsa. So we've got a very, very buoyant bait. The next thing I want you to look at on the DT Fat 1 is that short, almost I call it like a scoop bill. And if you look at that bill, it's almost straight up and down, right? And you've heard me talk about bill angle and what it helps that bait do. Well, with this short little scoop bill, this bait is going to dive just a little bit, right? DT Fat 1, that means it's only going to dive to 1 foot, right? See how small the bill is. And because of that severe angle, it's going to cause a very, very tight, erratic left to right movement, right? Short, stubby shovel bill, right? Just a little erratic movement. So high density, very buoyant because of balsa, short, little, almost straight up and down lip. And this lure is going to do stuff shallow in that top zone that other lures don't do. One of the keys to this lure is that it does not run off center. When you talk about a shallow runner, you talk about a wake bait. A lot of those lures have a tendency to blow out, right? As you reel it fast, the lure will blow out and it'll come off center. The great thing about this combination of the short lip and this balsa body is that it never loses track. It always runs. So we've got, in the DT Fat 1, we've got a buoyant, shallow running bait that's perfect for when fish are near or on that top zone of the water, right? Not just surface feeding fish, but subsurface fish, right? Just to give you guys some examples of when this DT Fat 1 is really going to play. Emergent vegetation, submergent vegetation, any grass that has lanes or highways running through it, it's perfect. So in the spring, as the milfoil and hydrilla start to grow, before it tops out, there's a zone of water above it, perfect. Submergent grass not grown to the top yet, perfect. Emergent grass, lily pads, reeds, emergent grasses that have lanes, perfect, right? So places where a normal diving crankbait, even a square bill, places where that kind of bait dive too deep, this is perfect. Surface to 1.5 foot down, that's what we're talking about here. Now, on how to fish this bait, the great thing about the DT Fat 1 is I'm going to give you 3 ways to fish the bait. Starting at the top, working my way down to that about foot level. All right, let's start at the top. The number one method I'm going to fish the Rapala DT Fat 1 is called a slow wake. And literally what I want to do is I want to cast this plug out. I want to cast it to that area where the fish are at, right? Shallow water vegetation, bushes, anything in that zone. Or even when the fish are just feeding up over deep water. I'm going to cast this lure toward that zone. When it first hits, I want it to sit for 5 seconds. Really, really key. So imagine this lure hitting, and I really want to count to 5 as those ripples dissipate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once I count to 5, I'm ready to begin the slow wake retrieve. But let me tell you, about 20% of the time, before I ever crank the handle, I'm going to get a fish to eat up on that, like a topwater, right? That bait hitting, that bait kind of shifting before it finds center. If a fish is there and he sees that, looks like an injured bait fish, he's going to eat it. The next part of this retrieve for the slow wake, just like it sounds, here it goes. Check this out, guys. I'm literally going to, after I wait that 5 seconds, I'm going to hold my rod high. I'm going to get my reel, and I'm going to barely reel it. Just going to barely turn that reel handle. About every 10 to 12 cranks, I'm going to throw in a pause. Once again, I'm going to wait 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I don't get a bite, I'm going to start reeling again. 10 to 12, 10 to 15 cranks, slow cranks, throw in a pause. And I'm going to do that all the way back to the boat. And because of the buoyancy and because of that lip, that small, shallow lip angle, dude, this thing's just barely waking the surface, right? So in essence, the DT Fat 1 as a slow wake bait, guess what? It's a topwater, right? Barely rippling the top, barely moving. Elicits a lot of strikes. It really does. It looks like something trying to get away. It looks like something injured. Great technique for the DT Fat 1. Technique number 1 is the slow wake. Technique number 2 is the fast wake. And it's the exact same technique without the pauses and a different rod positioning, okay? Once again, the great thing about this lure is it doesn't blow out. A lot of these wake baits that you see out there, plastic wake baits, as you reel them, it's too fast and they turn off center and they foul up, they don't run right. DT Fat 1 will run true. So the fast wake, same thing. We're going to make our long cast. We're going to throw it out there to where we think the fish are at. We're still going to do the 5-second wait in the beginning. We're going to count to 5, let those ripples dissipate. But this time, once the ripples dissipate, we're going to hold our rod super high. And I'm talking about a rod tip that's going to be in that, 1 to 2 o'clock rod position. Super high rod. And this time, we're going to burn it back without any pauses. Super fast retrieve. And because of the buoyancy and our rod positioning, this bait's going to stay just under the surface and wake really, really fast. For clear water, when the fish aren't as active, when the fish are more in a non-feeding mode, the speed of that lure can really trigger a reaction strike. So slow wake, fast wake, and then last but not least, we're going to do the medium crank. And this time, this bait's actually going to dive 1 foot to 1.5 feet, depending on your line. And we're going to talk about that in a second. And rod positioning is super, super key on this technique. Same bait. We're going to take this lure. And by the way, before I show you this one, this is the one that's really, really good for just tipping or just nicking that cover that's under the surface. I've done it with brush. I've done it with grass. I've done it with little stick-ups, to where the stick-ups are just under the surface. Anytime you have cover that's 1 foot to 1.5 feet under the surface, this is perfect. But in this medium crank technique for the DT Fat, we're going to make that same cast, This time when it hits, guys, don't let it sit 5 seconds. Immediately begin your retrieve. And as you begin your retrieve, I want you to lower that rod tip all the way down from about that 2, 3 o'clock, all the way down to parallel with the surface of the water. So I want you to actually get your rod tip low enough as you're retrieving it so your rod tip is just above the surface of the water, right? So you're actually almost parallel to the surface of the water. So now, by using that low rod tip, we're going to help this bait get off the top and actually dive about 1 foot to 1.5 foot down. And as I retrieve that, you heard me say it's just that medium crank. I'm just going to do a medium retrieve with my reel. Depending on the water clarity, the cleaner the water, the less I pause it. If it's got some stain or dirtiness to it, about every 20 cranks, I'll throw a short pause and then I'll reel it again. But I want to keep this bait subsurface by holding my rod tip low, by continuing that medium retrieve. It's going to get down about 1 foot. All right, let's talk a little bit about tackle and line on this killer sleeper bait in the DT family. Line is really crucial. And for the DT fat, I'm always going to throw it on, you ready for this one? Monofilament. Monofilament. Because remember, the DT Fat 1, it's surface to just subsurface. And mono floats. And because of that, that mono is going to help me keep it near the top. Now, mono size is very important on those 3 techniques. For my slow wake and for my fast wake, I'm going to use 15 to 20 pound mono. I really, really love the 17 pound mono. It's perfect. That thicker that mono, the more buoyant the bait's going to be. But for that medium crank, where I'm trying to get it down 1 foot or 1.5 foot, I'm going to step down and I'm going to use 8 to 12 pound mono. I love the 10 and the 12. It's a great size line. That little bit thinner diameter mono is going to help us get this bait just a little bit under the surface, about 12 to 14 inches under the surface, okay? So monofilament on the line. On the rod, I want to use a really long cranking style rod. So 7.5, 7.8, something like that, a 7.4 cranking rod is the rod I want to use. Now remember, if you go back and watch my other videos, you know my thought on treble hook lures. I want to use a rod that's really got a parabolic action to it, right? Very, very whippy rod. This particular rod is the 7.6 medium delay rod by Ebu Garcia. The winch rods are also great. So a long bait caster that has a lot of tip to it. And you know, that tip is going to help us load this lure to make long casts, but it's really going to help to add delay to the hook set, right? You know, remember, this bait, slow waking on the top, fast waking on the surface, even medium cranked. Let that fish get it in his mouth before you set the hook. And because that tip loads, look at it, right? You see that fish blow up on that bait, you set the hook, it takes time for that rod to load. It's like a rubber band. That gives you a little bit of delay. Then the other thing it does, remember, we got a lure that's got treble hooks on it. So when that fish is fighting next to the boat or jumping, that soft tip is like a shock absorber for the jump, right? And you just land a lot more fish with that medium action, that parabolic rod. All right, so long parabolic casting rod. And last but not least, the casting reel. And for the slow wake and for the medium crank retrieve, I'm using a slower gear ratio. 6 to 1 or 7 to 1 is perfect. And then for the burning technique, all I do, the wake technique, fast wake technique, just jump up to a fast gear ratio reel. Something that's 8-1 to 1, 8-3 to 1, even the new rockets that are 9-0 to 1. When you're burning that lure across the top with that rod tip high, that fast ratio lets you keep up with the lure, right? It's got a lot of speed to it. So pick the ratio based on the technique. Let me tell you, of all the DTs, and I love this bait, caught more fish on DT crankbaits, diving crankbaits, than any other crankbait in my life. But the DT Fat 1 is the sleeper. Give it a try. It's a great wake bait. It's a great subsurface bait. It's going to catch you a lot of fish. Man, if you like these videos, do me a favor real quick. Stop what you're doing. Hit that subscribe button. Mash that button. We're here to give you new information every single week. If you're already a subscriber, do me two things real quick. Do me two favors. Tell a fishing buddy about Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube and hit your notification button. That way, every time we have a new video out, it chimes, it dings, and you know it's coming. DT Fat 1, secret bait. Guess it's not a secret anymore. Give it a try. It's going to catch you a lot of fish. Bye.